Thank you so much. That was so nice. Hey, y'all. I always feel like the first day of South by Southwest, it's like summer camp. You know, everybody's fresh-faced and they have their shiny badges on. Um, and I feel very much like a camper who just got promoted to counselor. But anyway, we're going to get right into it here. So I am best known, or one of the things I'm known for is every morning I take a page from the New York Times and I start making boxes around words that pop out at me. And I start connecting the words into these little phrases or funny sayings. And then when I get something that looks good, I black out everything I don't need. And this is what it kind of looks like when they're done. It sort of looks like if the CIA did a haiku. And as you can tell, this one's about Texas. In Texas, there is nothing but Texas. This one's called Overheard on the Titanic. I mean, yes, we're sinking, but the music is exceptional. This one's called What is Marriage? Marriage is two people in love standing in the same bathroom. Now, when I first started making these, I figured newspapers wouldn't even be around after a while, so I figured I could just stop and do something else. But 9 years later, I'm kind of stuck with this body of work now, and I've actually become kind of a newspaper nerd, like I'm kind of a newspaper junkie. And it's always been this really silly dream of mine to appear in one of the articles that I was going to black out. And 2 weeks ago, my silly dream came true. I was interviewed by a reporter from the New York Times. I was quoted in the New York Times. I was even fact-checked by the New York Times, which honestly was the most thrilling part of the experience, getting the call from the fact-checker. Now, what did the New York Times interview me about? Did they ask me about my art? No, they did not ask me about my art. Did they review one of the 3 books I've published? No, they did not. I finally got in the New York Times, and what was the article about? The article was essentially asking whether the conference at which I get to give the keynote address, whether it had jumped the shark. Is it over? Has it gotten too big? Now, I know it's a question that everyone's asking, and probably, some of you have asked it. And truth be told, some of my best friends that I've made at South by Southwest didn't even bother to show up this year. And the question's been asked for years now. Has South by Southwest gotten too big? Is it over? And it's actually a question that the city of Austin's asking itself. Has it gotten too big? Is it over? And it's a question that the internet asks itself. Is it gotten too big? Is it over? Is there any room for the rest of us? Now, I don't personally think anything's over, but I do feel like, and stay with me on this, okay? I feel like we're sort of in a monster movie. Now, don't worry, you're safe right now. You're safe right now. We're in the farmhouse with the boarded up windows. But outside those walls, there are swarms of the infected. And the infected are split into 2 camps. I call them vampires and human spam. Now, how do you identify these infected? I will start with the vampires. And I'm going to illustrate with the story I read about Picasso. Pablo Picasso was notorious for sucking all the energy out of the people he met. His own granddaughter, Marina Picasso, suggested that he squeezed people out like one of his tubes of oil paints. It's quite the metaphor coming from your own granddaughter. Now here's what hanging out with Picasso was like. You would spend the afternoon with Picasso, having a good time, and then at the end of the day, you would end up a nervous, exhausted wreck. You'd head home and you'd basically collapse in your bed. But not Picasso. Picasso would go back to his studio and paint all night using the energy that he'd sucked out of you. Now, most people put up with this because, hey, he was Picasso. And when a so-called genius wants to hang out with you, you should probably hang out with him. But one guy who wasn't having any of it was Constantine Brancusi. Now, we're in Texas now. It doesn't matter if I mispronounced his name. This is the land of mispronunciations. Anyway, Brancusi hailed from the Carpathian Mountains in Romania, home of Vlad the Impaler and Dracula. Brancusi knew a vampire when he saw one. And Brancusi was not about to have his creative juices and his work sucked away from him. Brancusi practiced what I call the vampire test. It's kind of a simple way to determine who you should let in and out of your life. If, after hanging out with someone, you feel full of energy, that person is not a vampire. If, after hanging out with someone, you feel worn out and depleted, that person is a vampire. Now, keep the vampire test with you because you will certainly need it this week, especially if you plan on walking down 6th Street. And another important fact, vampires cannot be cured. Should you find yourself in the presence of a vampire, do what Brancusi did and banish it from your life forever. Now, there's another monster in this movie who is a cousin of the vampire, and that's a creature I call human spam. Now, what is human spam? I will illustrate with another rousing story. When I was in college, I took a lot of creative writing workshops. And inevitably, in every workshop, you would run into the classmate who said, well, I really like to write, but I don't like to read. And it was evident right away that you could write this person off completely. Because any writer knows that if you want to be a great writer, you have to be a great reader first. If you want to be a master, you have to first be an apprentice. If you want to have fans, you have to start off as a fan yourself. Now, the human spam amongst us, they have somehow missed this memo, and they exist in every profession, in every corner of the world. A piece of human spam, they want you to listen to their story, but they don't stick around to listen to yours. A piece of human spam wants you to fund his Kickstarter project when he's never funded a Kickstarter project in his life. A piece of human spam wants you to come to his South by Southwest panel, but he won't be coming to yours. Vampires and human spam, they exist on the same spectrum. The vampire wants to drain us, and the human spam wants to drown us. Now, vampires and human spam, I don't think they're necessarily malicious creatures. In fact, I think some of them started off as fairly lovely human beings. The trouble is I think they've been given the wrong operator's manual. They've been infected by the idea that the only way to get ahead in this life is to promote yourself endlessly and chill your products and destroy the competition and squirrel away glory for yourself. Where do these creatures come from? I personally think that these creatures stem from our faulty notion of creativity and work. Now, somehow in this culture, we have bought into the lone genius myth. And under the lone genius myth, creativity is the domain of the individual, the superhumanly gifted genius, the person born with originality in his DNA and talent flowing in his veins. This person is not like you or me. This person is special. And for the genius to be most effective, he must squirrel himself away in the confines of a studio and wait for inspiration to gather like storm clouds. And when the lightning of inspiration strikes, the genius harnesses it into his work, creating perfect masterpieces that he then graces us with so we might all gawk and awe at his achievements. Now, under this model, creativity is mostly an antisocial act, and the way to be more creative is to emulate geniuses. Wall yourself off from humanity, torment yourself and suffer for your art, keep your process and your ideas secret until you are ready to unleash them on the world, or until the world is ready to accept you as the gift from the gods that you are. The genius myth lets us get away with all sorts of terrible behavior. It's okay to be a vampire. It's okay to be a piece of human spam because you're special, because you have talent, because you're a genius. Now, that's the old model of creativity. And I'd like to suggest that there's another way of thinking about creativity that comes to us by way of Brian Eno, and that is called scenius. Now, scenius is a communal form of genius. Under this model, good work, creativity, and great ideas are birthed in a kind of network of creative individuals, a whole scene of artists, curators, thinkers, theorists, tastemakers, and fans who make up a kind of ecology of talent. Now, if you look back at history, many of the people who we think of as lone geniuses were actually, to quote Brian Eno, part of a whole scene of people who were supporting each other, looking at each other's work, copying from each other, stealing ideas, and contributing ideas. So yes, there was Da Vinci, but there was also 15th century Florence. Picasso, sure, but also Paris in the early 20th century. The Talking Heads, but also New York in the late 1970s. Now, scenius doesn't take away from the achievements of great individuals. It just acknowledges that good work isn't created in a vacuum, and that creativity is always, in some sense, a collaboration, the result of one mind connected to other minds. Now, what I personally love about scenius is that it makes room in the story of creativity for the rest of us, the people who don't consider ourselves geniuses. Being a valuable part of a scenius isn't necessarily about how smart or talented you are, but it's about what you have to contribute, the ideas you share, the quality of the connections you make, and the conversations you start. Now, South by Southwest is nothing but a gigantic potential scenius, but it will only work if we, the nodes in the network, so to speak, operate in a healthy way, in a way that nurtures that scenius along. Now, we all want to be noticed for our efforts, and we all want our work to be discovered. Balzac died over 150 years ago, and it was the same in his time. For artists, the great problem to solve is how to get oneself noticed. But there is a right way and a wrong way to go about it. There's a way that's good for us as individuals, and there's a way that's good for the scenius as a whole. So I would suggest that you forget about being a genius. You don't have to be a genius. You just have to become part of the scenius. If we forget about how we can be more like geniuses and we think more about how we can contribute and nurture a scenius, we can adjust our expectations and the expectations of the worlds we want to accept us. We can stop asking what others can do for us and start asking what we can do for others. Because a scenius cannot survive if it's only populated by vampires and human spam. Again, stick with me on this. We're in the climax of a monster movie, in the house with the boarded up windows, and the infected roaming around outside. And the plan we come up with in here is going to determine our fate, the fate of South by Southwest, and the fate of our worlds. Sorry about that. My goodness. I'll wake you up at least. Huh? So for the rest of the talk, I'd like to... What is that? Is that me? Is it this thing? Oh, I hate those things. Can you just cut that? How about this one? Is this one working? All right. Okay, sorry, folks. So I think there's a new way of operating. There's a way in which we can all move forward and be participants in this scenius without turning into vampires or human spam. And the first step is to shut up and listen. The way to become part of a scenius is to pay attention, to take stock of the current situation. Pay attention to what others are doing and make note of the kind of things that they are sharing. The best way to avoid becoming a piece of human spam is to simply close your mouth and open your eyes and your ears. Go up to people and ask questions. Let them talk. The novelist Richard Ford, he said, when people are listening, they tell you things. If you want to be accepted by a community, you have to first become a good citizen of that community. It's about the really simple stuff we were taught in Sunday school. If you want to get, you have to give. If you want to be interesting, you have to be interested. If you want to be noticed, you have to notice first. Now, the only reason I'm up here on the stage and you're listening to me is because I sat out there and I listened to the people on stage. When I first attended South by Southwest, I didn't really have much of a name or much of my own body of work to show anybody. I didn't feel like I had much to add to the conversation. But what I did have was a notebook and a pen, and I sat out there and I drew. I drew speakers. I drew panels. And I even sat in the dark at the Paramount and drew some movies. But instead of closing my notebook and keeping what I'd drawn to myself, I went home and posted the drawings online. And that's an important point that I want to make. Don't be a hoarder. When you come across great stuff, share it with people. Don't keep it all to yourself. Sharing work that you love is the first step towards sharing work of your own. The things that interest us are worth sharing because they attract attention of the people with similar interests to our own. When you share the things you love, you wind up meeting the people who love those things too. And sometimes, when you share work you love, you meet the people that did that work. I've actually made friends with so many of the people who I've drawn. And that's why it's also important to always give credit. You should always share the work of others as if it were your own, treating it with respect and care. Now, good credit is all about providing context for what you're sharing, what the work is, who made it, how they made it, when and where it was made, why you're sharing it, why people should care about it, and where people can see more work like it. When we make the case for crediting our sources, most of us just concentrate on the plight of the original creator of the work. But that's only half of the story. If you fail to properly attribute work that you share, you not only rob the person who made it, you rob all the people you've shared it with. Without attribution, they have no way to dig deeper into the work or find more of it. If you share work without credit, you're really not making any kind of connection at all. Your sharing is meaningless. Sharing work you love leads to meeting your own kind, and meeting your own kind is one of the goals of this whole human endeavor, and it's the thing that Scenius is really good at. So I want to switch gears real quick and talk about baseball. This might be a weird place to do that, but I'm going to go ahead. So a few years ago, I became really fascinated by the baseball pitcher R.A. Dickey. Now, Dickey's pitch, for those of you in the know, is the knuckleball. It's a slow, awkward pitch that's really hard to throw with any kind of consistency. This is what it looks like. So when a pitcher throws a knuckleball, he releases the baseball with as little spin as possible. And the air current, it kind of moves across the baseball seams, and it makes the baseball move really strangely. And once a good knuckleball is thrown, it's equally unpredictable to the batter, the catcher, and the pitcher who threw it. It kind of sounds a little bit like the creative process. Now, knuckleball pitchers are basically the ugly ducklings of baseball. Because the pitch is so unpredictable, there aren't many pitchers who attempt perfecting it. And because there are so few knuckleball pitchers, instead of being super competitive with each other, they actually form a kind of brotherhood. This is what Dickey writes in his memoir. He says, "There's no chance that an opposing pitcher, no matter how nice a guy, is going to invite me to watch how he grips and throws his split-fingered fastball or slider. Those are state secrets." But with Dickey's fellow knuckleballers, things are a little bit different. This is what he says. He says, "Knuckleballers don't keep secrets. It's as if we have a greater mission beyond our own fortune, and that mission is to pass it on, to keep the pitch alive." So as you hang out in your senius and you start sharing things, you will run into your fellow knuckleballers. And these are your real peers. These are your inner circle, they're the people who share your obsessions, the people who share a similar mission to your own, and the people with whom you'll share a mutual respect. And it's very important when you meet these people not to treat them as your competition, but to treat them as potential collaborators or co-conspirators. So when I first started posting my drawings of South by Southwest online, people pointed to other people who are also posting drawings at South by Southwest. People like my friends Dave Gray and Mike Rohde and Sonny Brown. And at first, I had that vampire genius pang in my gut, oh shit, I'm not very original. But then I moved on and I realized that something interesting was happening here. That in this conference that celebrated digital ones and zeros, it was actually people who were using their digits to draw that were gathering attention. It's okay, honey, it's almost over. That's my kid. So anyway, the next year, I suggested that we all band together, and I put together a panel teaching people some really basic drawing skills and lettering skills that would allow them to do the same kind of drawings at South by Southwest. And it was a really well-attended panel, and it felt like at least half of the people who attended the panel actually went on to draw themselves. And the next year, there's this whole army of people drawing at South by Southwest, and here's one of them over here on the side of the stage. Now, just because we taught people how to draw at South by Southwest didn't mean all of a sudden that we had all this competition, like we were putting ourselves out of business or something. In fact, both Mike and Sonny went on to publish books about how to draw. The interest in drawing, it didn't subtract from their own work, it actually added value to it. And so that's why I say, teach what you know. The minute you learn something, turn around and teach it to others. It doesn't even matter if you're an expert at it. The writer C.S. Lewis, he said, a student can help a fellow student more than a teacher because the fellow student knows less. When a student teaches, he's newer to the material that he's teaching, and so the difficulty of understanding it is one that he's recently met. The expert or the seasoned teacher met the material so long ago, he often forgets what it's like to come to it as a student. So I think the best way to get started on the path to becoming part of a senius is to think about what you want to learn to do and make a commitment to learning it in front of others. Document your progress and share as you go so that others can learn along with you. Work out in the open. And don't just, gotta go back here, sorry. Don't just share your products, share your process. Think about what you know how to do that other people would be interested in learning. Think about what you have to contribute. When you teach someone how to do your work, when you let them work over your shoulder, you are, in effect, generating more interest in your work. People feel closer to your work because you're letting them in on what you know. And of course, teaching is not a completely altruistic activity. When you share your knowledge and your work with others, you receive an education in return. After I put out my first book, Newspaper Blackout, I decided to start a site where I encouraged people to make their own poems and post them online and share them with others. And this interesting thing happened. I've actually learned so much from these folks because they send me the craziest stuff. I find a lot of things to steal from them. It benefits me just as much as it does them. Now, going back a bit, when I saw that small army drawing ideas at South by Southwest, I thought it might be time to start drawing some of my own ideas. And that's really a constant process. You have to kind of take a look at the scenius and make note of what's not being done as much as what's being done. Look out for the voids for where you might be able to fill your own efforts. And that's where you position yourself and you do work that connects people. And then you go on and find another void and fill it and do work that connects people. And then that's one way to go about a career is you just keep looking for the voids and you fill them with your own efforts. And once you've made these connections, you have to be on the lookout for even more to fill. And you just kind of repeat this over and over. When I was working on my book, Steal Like an Artist, I just kind of wrote a book that I wanted to read. I just kind of wrote a book that I thought was missing from the bookstore shelves. And a funny thing happened while I was working on it. Tons of people pointed out how unoriginal I was. And they pointed to the work of, the really great work of Kirby Ferguson, the filmmaker, and his series Everything is a Remix. And it was very obvious that Kirby and I were kind of circling the same territory. But again, like I suppressed that vampire gut urge, and instead of seeing Kirby as competition, I saw him as a fellow knuckleballer, and I reached out to him. And then we ended up doing a panel together the next year. And it was a really successful and well-attended panel, and it kind of helped us both along. And this is a process I've tried to kind of repeat over time because, this is not a reality show, and I'm not a reality show contestant. I'm here to make friends, And when I see people whose work I respect and sometimes envy, I understand that those are the people that I want to learn from, the people that I want to be my allies, The drummer for The Roots, Questlove, he says, the only mofos that I let in my circle are the ones I can learn from. Because it's actually true in life that, it's about who you know. But who you know is largely dependent on who you are and what you do. And the people you know can't do anything for you if you're not doing good work. Dave or Mike or Sonny or Kirby, they wouldn't have said yes to my proposals if I wasn't doing work that they were also interested in, and if I didn't have something to also offer them. There was a really great Reddit AMA. How many people here know who Steve Albini is? Yeah, so he's the famous record producer. He produced the Pixies record and the first record and Nirvana's In Utero and tons of other great stuff. But anyway, he did this Reddit AMA, and one of the people who jumped on was this former X Factor contestant. I don't know if you remember him. He sang Creep and did like a weird robot dance. But anyway, he asked Steve right in the Reddit, he was like, hey man, will you produce my record for me? And he was basically kind of acting like a piece of human spam, And I feel like he thought that if he could just kind of hitch himself to Albini's wagon, his genius would shine through, His problem was he just didn't have the right connections, is what he thought. And Albini called bullshit on this. And this is what he said. He said, connections don't mean shit. I've never had any connections that weren't a natural outgrowth of doing things I was doing anyway. He then kind of lamented how people waste time and energy trying to make connections instead of getting good at things, when being good at things is the only thing that earns you clout or connections. So, all the people I look up to today and, try to steal from, they all sort of know this intuitively. What they've done is they've all dedicated themselves to their thing, but they've built sharing into their routine. These people aren't schmoozing at cocktail parties. They're too busy for that. They're just cranking away in their studios and their labs or in their cubicles. But instead of maintaining absolute secrecy and hoarding their work, they're open about what they're working on, and they're consistently posting bits and pieces of their work and their ideas and what they're learning online. Following these people, it's kind of like getting all the DVD extras before a movie comes out. You kind of get to watch the deleted scenes and listen to the director's commentary while the movie's being made. So instead of wasting their time networking, what they're doing is they're taking advantage of the network. And what happens is, by generously sharing their ideas and their knowledge, they kind of nurture a genius along that they can then leverage when they need it for fellowship, feedback, or patronage. Now, these people they're playing a long game. They're putting in their little bits of effort, and they're sharing pieces of the work, and they're having faith that over time, those little bits of effort will turn into something big. Now, playing a long game is not something that this conference does extremely well when it comes to talking about. South by Southwest is the place we go to see the next big thing. What's the new app? What's the breakout film? Who's the breakout band? But I have to say that one of my most memorable South by Southwest experiences was in 2011. I went to see the premiere of Herzog's Cave of Forgotten Dreams. If you're not familiar with the film, it's about the Chauvet Caves in southern France, and it's home to the oldest cave paintings on Earth. They're over 30,000 years old. And this thing happened when I walked out of that dark theater. I kind of walked into the Texas sunshine, and I saw this grandfather and his granddaughter, and they were drawing in chalk on the sidewalk. And as a person who spends the majority of his time making marks to create meaning, I got kind of really overwhelmed and emotional thinking about the way that marks can last and the way they travel through time and the way they can connect human beings. I had also had a lot of beers at the Alamo. And I felt very lucky that up until that point, I'd spent my life learning how to make marks and make meaning. Because it's very easy in this place right now and in this culture to get caught up chasing that next big thing, And so let's not forget to chase after the thing that lasts, the thing that's going to be around. I realized that in the past couple of years, my favorite art documentaries, they've all been about senior citizens. People like Bill Cunningham in Bill Cunningham, New York. He spent his career living a lean, kind of monk-like existence, prowling the streets of New York, taking photos for the New York Times. Or someone like Joan Rivers, who's actually on the complete opposite of the spectrum. She makes a ton of money, and then she spends it all, so she has to keep working, telling jokes. And then back again to someone like Jiro from Jiro Dreams of Sushi. He lives this humble, dedicated existence, doing one thing and one thing only, and doing it better than anyone else, making sushi. These are all people who have dedicated themselves to a craft, and they've let that dedication see them through the ups and downs in their lives. And it's these people that I'm really looking up to right now, basically the people who are eligible for the senior discount at Denny's. It's the people who've been around, not the 30-year-old idiots like me who got lucky. Because we're in the midst of a culture in which we celebrate the fastest rising stars. We're in this culture, something like the startup culture, where the highest peak of success is selling something off that you spent years and years bidding, selling it away to the highest bidder. So, I want you all to think about, ask yourself, what are you building right now that's going to last? What are you dedicating yourself to that's going to see you through until your end? And if that seems scary or like a lot of work, picture this. Everyone in this room is going to be dead one day. There's a cheery thought for you. Start South by Southwest on. Most of us prefer to ignore this basic fact of life, but thinking about our inevitable end has a way of putting everything into perspective. We've all heard stories of people having near-death experiences, and it springs them into action. Because people who've had experiences with death, they tend to be better at looking at life like the gift it is. Because a proximity to death puts us in touch with life. Now, I will tell you what my problem is. My problem is that I am a coward. And as much as I would love the existential euphoria that comes with a near-death experience, I do not want to die, and I do not want to court death, and I do not want to taunt it or invite it any closer to me. But what I do want to do is I want to somehow remember that it's coming for me. And it's for this reason that, going back to the newspaper, I don't black out the obituaries. I actually read the obituaries. because I think that obituaries are like near-death experiences for cowards. Reading them is a way for me to think about death while keeping it at an arm's length. Reading about people who are dead now and did things with their lives makes me want to get up and do something decent with mine. Thinking about death every morning makes me want to live. So, it might seem like it's going to bum you out, but try it. Try it for a week. Start reading the obituaries every morning. Take inspiration from the people who've muddled through life before you, because they all started out as amateurs and beginners. And they all got where they were going by making do with what they were given and having the guts to put themselves out there. Because this life is mostly just, as far as I can tell, it's mostly an endurance match. Because every life is full of ups and downs, and when you're in the middle of living out your life, you don't know whether you're up or whether you're down or what's going to happen next. So it's very important not to quit prematurely, because the people who get what they're after are often the ones that just stick around long enough. You can't plan on anything. You can only go about your work, as Isaac Dinesen wrote, every day without hope or despair. You can't count on success or getting discovered. You can only leave open the possibility for it and be ready to jump on and take the ride when it comes for you. So I encourage you, when you're lost, when you're thinking about your next move, just think about that idea of senius, and think about how you can be not a piece of human spam or a vampire, but a contributor, someone who helps that senius along. Don't be creepy, don't be a jerk, don't waste people's time, don't ask too much, and don't ever ask people to follow you. Follow me back is the saddest question on the internet. Because that's how we battle the infected, the vampires and the human spam, and that's how we live through our monster movie and save South by Southwest, by being human beings. Just, share your work that you love, show your own work, and you'll meet the people that you need to meet and the people who will get you where you need to go. Thanks for listening to me. Hope that wasn't too dark for y'all. Not too dark. I think we've got time for Q&A, right? Yeah. Okay, and I guess I'm going to do it with this Twitter thing. What is one daily habit that fuels creativity is the question. That fuels my creativity, other than reading obituaries, which I think is pretty good. I think any habit where you spend a dedicated amount of time to your practice, to something that you do, is worthwhile. And I've always thought that it's not the amount of time you have to spend on your work, but it's the repetitive nature of it, doing it every day. But I don't think there's one thing you could do. I might say read, if there's one habit that you could do that would make you more creative. Who has been one of your favorite teachers, aka someone in your life that inspired you? I'm gonna give a shout out to my wife. She's put up with a lot of shit from me in the past 7 years, but also 7 days. And one of the things I like about being married to someone that's smarter than you is that you get their brain trust and they make you smarter. Okay, next question. If getting good equals making connections, what's the number one thing we should do at South by Southwest? Shut up and listen. Yeah, I think the number one thing you could do is, just figure out what your 3 big takeaways are and go back and share them with the world. Share them with the people that are really important to you, Take whatever you can from this and bring it back to wherever you are, whether it's your workplace or your loved ones or wherever, and share the message. What writing instrument do you use for your books or your newspaper blackouts? For the blackouts, actually, you know what? I use a marker for both of them because I do a lot of writing by hand. And so I do a lot of writing by hand with a marker, and then I black out the newspaper with a marker. So If two people exhaust each other, vampire fight. That's not even English. Come on now. Who's moderating these? I really don't know what that means. Take that off the screen. What do you prefer to watch? Is it The Simpsons or American Dad? Fox. It's called Bob's Burgers. Come on. Come on. What else? How big of a trip is it speaking to this big of a crowd? It is a trip, as in I'm hoping not to trip off the stage when I leave. Thank you. Next question. Is there an antidote for vampires? I personally don't think it's worth trying to cure vampires, but I think actually the antidote to vampires is just making sure you don't become one yourself, is to being a good example. How is it best to find people to share your work with? How do you find people to share your work with? Well, it's weird because I think for me, I never really knew who to share my work with. I just kind of started a blog and started putting stuff out there, and the people that were looking for the work, they just kind of showed up. So I think like when you first get started, you're not necessarily going to know who is going to show up, like who's the audience for the work. So sometimes I think it's good to just put it in a place where people can see it, and then the people show up themselves. But otherwise, I think you go in your local community. You just find people around you that you can hang out with, and you share it with them if you're not ready to put it out publicly. And you just kind of like get a group together. Like the first thing I tell young writers is to get a writing group together with people your own age or different ages, but people who are interested in the same kind of writing. Tips for inspiring creativity in your offspring. That's a good one. I wish I knew. I mean, mine's 16 months. The thing that we just try to do is we read to him constantly. I mean, we read to him when he was in the womb, and we read to him now over and over, because I've always believed, and as a writer, I believe that reading is the thing that really jumpstarts a lot of stuff. So, what do you say when someone asks what you do? Man, this is a really good question. So I really think like. That's the question that shuts us all down, It's like when you're at a party and you're standing around and someone says, like, well, what do you do? I think, like, if you're an artist, it's especially bad, because if you say artist, or actually, like, if you say writer, they'll say, have you published anything? Which is just a veiled way of saying, do you make any money off that? But I think we all need, like, our little elevator pitch. So one of the things I did a while back is I just stole one. There's a guy named Saul Steinberg who was a genius cartoonist and artist, and he called himself a writer who draws. So I just took that from him because he's not using it anymore. So. What's the hardest part of overcoming the envy of others' work? Man, that's a really good question, too. There's a great chapter in Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. It's kind of a guide to writing, but it's good for anyone who wants to do creative stuff. And she has a chapter on jealousy. And rather than me try to answer that question, I'd say go find Anne Lamott's book, Bird by Bird, and read the jealousy chapter. Because I think that, the best thing to do with envy is, like I said, to just kind of like turn the people you envy into your peer group, the people you want to learn from, and to not think of them as competition, but as teachers. Have you ever been burned by a knuckleballer? I was the worst baseball player ever. And so, yeah, I probably was. I probably swung and missed a lot. Oh, wait, that's a metaphorical question. I'm being pretty literal for a supposedly creative person. Have I ever been burned by a knuckleballer? That's a really good question. I'm not going to say publicly whether I was, but that's a good thing. When a knuckleballer turns on you, they're technically becoming a vampire, and so you just have to cut them out of your life. And I try to think that that's what I've done. They almost snuck that one past me. This one says, what has been the most effective way of sharing your work that has connected you to your genius, print, blog, or Twitter? So my blog at austincleon.com, shill, I think the blog, honestly, blogs have a longer shelf life than people, I think, really give them credit for. I mean, I've been keeping my blog up for almost like 8 or 9 years now, and it's really at the blog where things really started to happen for me, and that's where I make sure that the work I really care about and the stuff that I really want to write about happens. But I love Twitter. I love hanging out on Twitter. What's your POV on working with brands? Depends on the paycheck, I guess. I don't know. I don't work with a lot of brands. Next question. What session at South by Southwest are you looking forward to learning the most from? So let's go back to that senior citizen model. There are 2 senior citizens speaking, I think Sunday, that I would highly recommend, and they're speaking at the same time. One is Jeffrey Tambor, and he does an acting workshop, which is unbelievable, and I try to attend every day. I hope Jeffrey Tambor doesn't want to beat me up for calling him a senior citizen, but his acting workshop is awesome. The one I'm going to go to is one of my cartoonist heroes, Ralph Steadman, is going to be here at 3:30 on Sunday, and that's who I'm going to go see. And he also qualifies for the Denny's discount. What are you working on right now? What are you reading? Awesome question. I'm working on Not Losing My Mind, but that's kind of an all-the-time thing. I don't know. I mean, I've done 2 books about creativity that were kind of how-to books. I'm getting a little zapped on talking about creativity, and I want to do a little bit more, actually being creative in my work. So I don't know what the next step is for me, but it'll become apparent here to me soon. But what am I reading right now? I'm reading Gary Steingart's memoir, Little Failure. It's really funny. And I read Adam Sternberg's Shovel Ready recently. That was really funny. It was a good, like, noirish. It's about a garbage man who turns hired killer. It's fun. And then my favorite book last year was a book called The Sisters Brothers. It's a Western. I'm a book nerd. I could talk about books all day. What is the biggest trigger of a good idea? I don't know. I mean, I think people who say, like, a good idea, I think a good idea will sneak up on you. I don't know who I'm plagiarizing right now, but I'm plagiarizing someone who said, a good idea, if it's really good, it's one you've had before. And so when it hits you as a good idea, it's just one that's, like, been slow burning and building up. What's the best way to build a team of creatives? Honestly, I think the best way, other than to pick people who are really good at what they do, there's lots of people who are good at what you do, but man, when you're at work, you have to spend so much time with the people you work with that I think you should just pick people that you genuinely want to hang out with every day, because we're all stuck at work and we're all hanging out with them. And I think that at the end of the day, your work is about the people you're around just as much as the work. It's a good question, though. What is the biggest piece of advice you have for someone starting a small business? Well, of course, it's show your work. Think about your process. Think about what you do that makes you genuinely interesting as a business, and figure out a way to show that to your clients in a way that interests them, and keep an ongoing relationship with them. How do you politely get away from vampires and human spam without burning bridges? Give them a business card. Say, oh, do you have a card? Oh, yeah, I've got a card. All right, well, yeah, we'll get together later, and then skirt away. That's what I think business cards are good for these days. Sorry if I do that to you later. Any other questions? Are we out of questions? Oh, here. Do you work in a closed room? Yes. But I have a window to look out of. And it's white. I actually work in my garage, which I like, I like the fact that my studio is kind of like a garage where, people tinker. I like the idea of being in a tinkering room. How do you answer senior skeptics? I don't really answer them. I mean, I think that's kind of the fun thing about like putting your idea. I mean, it's first of all, it's not even my idea. It's Eno's idea, but I think that's the thing is like I don't spend a lot of time. The idea's out there, and if someone doesn't like it, they can write about it, and then hopefully I'll write something back. But I don't spend a lot of time arguing with people about it. What are your favorite online platforms other than Twitter and Tumblr for discovering inspirational content? I am a big fan of newsletters these days. I think newsletters are making a really interesting comeback. There's a gal named Ann Friedman who does a really fun one. I really like the format of hers. My friend Dave Gray has an awesome newsletter. He doesn't do it all that often, but it's really good. I'm going to mess up his name. Alexis Madrigal does this one that's like, 5 interesting things? He's got one that's really interesting that's daily. But I think the newsletter is kind of making a comeback, and I really like newsletters these days. And I have one too. Anyway. Do you have a favorite poem that you've created? I'm going to do the really cliche thing that artists do and say, yes, the one I haven't created yet. The one I'm about to. Does Genius make the 10,000 hour rule redundant? I think they're referring to Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule. No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think Genius is a replacement for doing the really hard work, but I do think it can kind of accelerate things along. Next. Would you rather fight a horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses? This is a funny question because I live in this neighborhood in town where there's a little pond and there actually are a bunch of ducks and they're terrifying. Like they're totally like they will come after you. I don't know. I'll go with one thing. I could probably outrun a horse-sized duck. We'll go with that. Should we just wrap this up? What would you describe as good networking? Connecting with the people who might want you to share your work. I think good networking is no networking, honestly. Like, I really believe that in this day and age, like, a lot of really good networking is you put your work out there and you see who kind of gathers around it and see who's interesting. And then when you happen to be in the same meet space, then you make that call, then you make that connection, I mean, that's the way I've always felt more comfortable doing it. Do you prefer creating with digital or analog tools? Oh, this is from our friends at Blackwing. They make awesome pencils. What was that question about working with brands? I do two things. I mean, like, I see the analog digital thing as I make a lot of stuff with analog tools, and then I use digital tools to edit them and publish them and that kind of thing. So I don't have a preference, but I do, like, when it comes to the creation, I think using analog tools for me personally, like, that's where I like it to begin, and then I use digital tools to change it. What's your favorite cartoon? I don't know if they mean comic strip or cartoon. I'd probably say Peanuts for a comic strip and probably Looney Tunes for a cartoon. Why do acting classes interest you, and how do they influence what you do? I think acting classes interest me because I'm so removed from it. Like, when I go see Jeffrey Tambor's workshop, it's very much about things that I really don't know anything about. And so I like to be influenced by other kinds of creative folks. And then I forget the rest of the question. But acting is interesting. Like, I got really interested in improv after I read Tina Fey's book, and then Harold Ramis died recently, and he was talking about improv too, and the whole concept of an improv, the thing is you don't say no, you say yes and that's kind of an interesting thing for Genius. Someone asked a really great question, how do you balance work and family, before this one was up, and it's really hard. I think it's like everything else that you balance. You just make time for the things that you want to keep in your life. Thank you for telling people to be good citizens. Is there any art that isn't fundamentally a remix? I suppose. I mean, I just think that most art, it comes from what came before. And I think that, of course, originality is, there is art that's super original, but a lot of times I feel like the originality comes from the depth and the breadth of the influences and how they're mixed together. Thank you. You've been really great. Thanks.